Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm sorry I joined a bit late. I was just battling with traffic in Bangkok, but I'm very happy to be with you now and look forward to sharing some of my own learning as an international environmental lawyer, at least, by training, in terms of learning about children's rights and also thinking about how others in international environmental law should learn about children's rights and practice protection of children's rights so that they can listen and learn from children. I would like to share my screen, but I'm not sure if I need to be allowed. Oh, I can see it. Maybe I am able to. Sorry.
Let me check.
Sorry, I'm able. I'm just a bit slow, but getting there.
Yes.
Yeah, so what I would like to share with you is basically my own journey in thinking about and trying to practice meaningful respect for children's human rights to be heard and freedom of expression in environmental decision-making processes. This started as an academic journey for the past 5 years. Before becoming UN Special Rapporteur, I had the privilege of being part and leading a global coalition of researchers in natural sciences, social sciences, arts, human rights from the global north and the global south. And together we were thinking about how to clarify the relationship between human rights and the ocean, which at least 5 years ago seemed a bit of a far-fetched one. And yet already many children and young people were advocating very much for protecting the deep seabed and the ocean, and very much understanding how important that was for climate change as well. I think in ways that were so much more articulate and persuasive than many adults at the time and today. And this is where my interest started in looking at the Convention on the Rights of the Child and understanding exactly the content, not only the legally binding nature of those rights, but also the content of those rights and what they mean for the practice of international environmental decision-making, and in fact, decision-making at any levels. At the time, we focused in particular on ocean fora and climate change fora, again, also as a response to children and young people that were themselves emphasizing this nexus as part of their advocacy on protecting human rights in the context of the ocean. And I'm very thankful, particularly to my colleague Sophie Shields, an emerging researcher who's a human rights and children's rights expert, and also to my colleague Mia Strand, who's a practitioner of children-led methodologies and more generally art-based methodologies in research. And so what we did, it's quite interesting. We published this article on children's rights to be heard in a journal on the law of the sea. And as part of a broader reflection about how the law of the sea is developing to address climate change and also to address more and more human rights, but very much with the idea of building the awareness and the capacity of law of the sea experts and international environmental lawyers vis-a-vis children's rights. And even in the process of writing this article, we realized all the blind spots and misconceptions the adults that have been working in international environmental law in many forms have about children. Some of the things that Benoit already mentioned, what would children know about the ocean climate nexus? How would they be able to speak to us and fit into our processes? And also, how would we include them? I think there's a lot of fear, not just, I think, a due concern about safeguarding and using tested methodologies, ideally led by children or co-developed by children. But sometimes we have a crippling fear of doing the wrong thing. And because of that, we don't try anything in terms of including children or listening to them, other than maybe asking them to send, drawings or send messages. But that's not really a dialogue. And I think more and more we're realizing that for that transformation that we need in the face of the planetary crisis, a dialogue, and in fact, an intergenerational dialogue is what's needed. So what we did in this piece of work in terms of academic reflection was, first of all, just spelling out the content of children's human rights to be heard and to express their ideas, and clarifying state obligations in terms of giving safe, inclusive, and genuine opportunities to form and express views. And so those points that Benoit just made around access to information, meaningful engagement were really crucial there. Ensuring that participation is iterative and based on fun, which I remember was one of the most shocking pieces of news for environmental lawyers and love the sea lawyers, that, you know, participation could be and should be fun, as well as something that's a relationship building. It's not a one-off exchange, but really very much about intergenerational dialogue on an ongoing basis and leading to mutual learning. And of course, then what comes after that listening and that dialogue moment of giving due weight to the views of children, prioritizing their best interest as expressed and understood by children, and motivating, reasoning, providing reasoned explanations for the decisions that are taken in the light also of the views of children. And through that, I think that is the only meaningful path towards preventing disproportionately negative impacts on children from environmental harm, including climate change. We can't do that, you know, without them being there and letting us know how these impacts are felt by them, how they're shaping their lived experiences. We can, of course, do our own research as adults, complement the information, but surely we can't just replace ourselves, and there's lots of risks in that patronizing and paternalistic approach about adults second guessing or speaking for children and conveying their understanding of their best interest. And after this doctrinal work, which in some ways may not be so groundbreaking from, you know, for those experts in children's rights among the audience, but it was really very new in terms of reading existing international obligations in the law of the sea, in international environmental law, in the light and in conjunction with those relevant provisions in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And at the time, the draft General Comment 26, which we were also fortunate to contribute to. And on the basis, we developed a framework. So just trying to capture this into a model that could be relatable and hopefully be maybe championed either by states or international organizations who would be keen to put this in practice. This was very much a model that was based on the Lundy model for meaningful participation. It was also very much inspired by Peleg's work and also Aoife Daly's work on paternalism and moving away from paternalism in the context of climate justice. And just distilling both like practical approaches, considerations, methods, and again, raising the awareness of international environmental lawyers that those methodologies already exist. The knowledge, the understanding, the practices shouldn't be invented from scratch by international environmental lawyers who are just starting to learn about children's rights. But in fact, it is essential to work with children's rights experts and build and integrate the methodologies that they have already co-developed with children, tested with them, and bring in all that learning that has already been accrued in the context of those organizations that have been working with children before in meaningful ways. So I won't go into the details of this, but just very much thinking also about how we needed to raise awareness around adults' responsibilities, not placing undue burdens on children, being very mindful also already of the mental health toll that they are bearing because of climate anxiety and because of that being left out of decision making. And very much that idea of how we spell out those steps about iterative learning and dialogue. And this idea of how we need to get back to children, let them understand how the process has taken into account their views or not, the reasons for that, and how things then progress, what happens next, and how the dialogue can continue in meaningful ways for them. From that work, I was quite fortunate then in being appointed as UN Special Rapporteur to try and experiment and applying that learning and those also legal findings and the relationships I had built with the children's rights civil society community into the work of the mandate. Other special rapporteurs have included children in their work in many different ways, which I think we need to capture the learning. In my case, I guess the approach was slightly different because I decided to include children in the very kind of conceptualization and development of my vision for the mandate. So not asking children to contribute to specific pieces of work that had already been preconceived by myself, But in fact, children were part of a broad range of consultations that I had with states, with UN agencies, with different human rights holders, with adult environmental human rights defenders in different regions. And thanks to the support of a whole coalition of children rights NGOs, I had this beautiful dialogue with almost 20 children from different regions. And before that, several other children had a meeting among ourselves to decide, had a broader view about what my priorities should be. It was very beautiful to see that thankfully our own thinking was very aligned, and my own priority in supporting implementation of general comment was also there. Number one priority, of course, fully understanding the impacts of climate change on their rights to health, food, and good standard of life, thinking about education, whole questions of access to technologies and just transition, discrimination, and looking particularly at intersectionality in children in more vulnerable situations. To me, both the messages, which I think are so clear and so also beautifully conveyed by the colleagues that supported the exercise, but just the quality of the dialogue, how accurate, how meaningful children were. The question they asked me if I was doing this consultation out of duty or out of my own independent initiative, how they were holding me accountable to them at every step of the way. I just loved the process. I learned so much, and I felt that it was such a gift and something that really was what is needed for this mandate in particular that has so much to do not only with children's future, but in fact with their present. And in fact, I then collected my thinking, my reflections from this consultation process, both with adults and children in a 3-page document where I have also outlined my priorities. And I was very keen to convey some of the questions that the children posed to me, and particularly the one that has stayed with me the most is, why are government not listening to us and to the demands we have for the protection of human rights and the environment? And I think, partly I had an idea already in my own experiences engaging with international environmental lawyers and diplomats, and more also human rights diplomats. But partly I think this is a deeper question around how the transformative potential of children participation and intergenerational dialogue to speak the truth, to hold accountable to truth, and to really reimagine creatively with empathy a different present that we all need. So a very, in a way, disconcerting and potentially threatening process in terms of the established power dynamics and power imbalances that explain the situation we're in, climate change, as well as broader planetary crisis. And I was also very interested to discuss with children how we could stay in touch throughout the mandate. They had several ideas, again, through partnerships, thanks also to the good offices on Anne Skelton and the partnership with the Leiden Law Clinic. We're now developing children-friendly versions of my thematic reports. But also what children said was like, we should stay in a dialogue. It's not that you can call us, in and out when you need us. We want to know what you're up to, what you're thinking. And I've realized actually that what would be really good is also from my side to share my own learning, do my own homework in terms of understanding more what the issues are, what the evidence base is, what the opportunities for change are, and then share that on an ongoing basis with children and see what they think. And of course, try to reach a broader range of children than the ones that I had been able to be in touch. And so they suggested using social media, which I hadn't been on before. I mean, I've been on Instagram, but I never used TikTok before, but apparently that was their preferred platform. And thanks to a young climate activist, and again, support from the beautiful network of children rights organizations, we're about to launch now a TikTok channel for me and also other young and child activists to share on an ongoing basis my work, what I'm thinking about, what I'm learning, and hopefully hearing from them. All of that is a pilot, and we will be very clear about how we are learning as we're going. In terms of safeguards as well, we've been thinking, for instance, of asking children not to make comments directly on the platforms, but send emails in a more protected way directly to me and my volunteer colleagues. And together, little by little, and with ongoing advice from the children rights NGOs, see how this experience can evolve, can be meaningful, but I think more importantly than everything, how it can lead to iterative learning for myself, for children, for the NGOs, about whether this kind of engagement that is not only has been co-developed from the outset with children, but is also going to be iteratively discussed with them, what we will reflect and self-reflect about what is meaningful, what is changing for them, but also what it can change for adults, that through this process we'll be able to see and maybe think about other ways in which children can be meaningfully heard and become more and more of our day-to-day participants in relevant decision-making processes. And maybe just to conclude with a slightly overwhelming slide about all the different places in which we need to listen to children's voices and think about their best interests and their human rights across a range of international processes, many of which are very far from being ready to have safe and meaningful spaces for this intergenerational dialogue. But that should not deter us from piloting carefully, meaningfully, different ways in which I think adults can become more and more aware and maybe interested in the intergenerational dialogue. And the opportunity has not just for all of us to play our part in protecting children's rights, but maybe be more imaginative, creative adults that can be better able to take transformative decisions across the range of decision-making spaces where we can address climate change and other planetary crises. So I'll stop there. I hope I didn't go over time and look forward to the conversation.